All right, all right. Well, welcome everybody. I know we've got folks coming in to the room here, and I'm happy everybody could join us. And for those that couldn't but are going to get this in recording, thanks for registering. Good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and thanks again, as always, for joining us on our webinar series. Really excited about our special webinar today, N1 Philanthropy: The End of the Average Donor. And we're very fortunate to have with us someone today who's really been working at the leading edge of AI. He's the founder of fundraising.ai, the first ever chief AI officer at Virtuous, where he spearheads responsible AI initiatives for some of the sector's most innovative organizations. And today he's going to spend about 60 minutes with us walking through the future of fundraising, the possibilities and challenges of AI, and the ideas shaping a more personalized approach to generosity. Very excited to have this speaker with us, and I'll get to his introduction in a hot minute here. But just wanted to, again, say here at Stelter, we're passionate about helping nonprofits like yours discover opportunities for growth through asset-based giving. We also love fostering connections across the nonprofit community through our webinar series, of which we've been doing for over a decade, where we bring together thought leaders like Nathan from around the country to share ideas, actionable insights, and practical tips fundraisers can use. This is actually our fourth of eight this year. You haven't been able to log in and connect with some of the previous speakers, our great team who walked through Giving USA feedback recently, Phil Purcell, Kent Weimer, and others. You can always go to stelter.com/webinars to access those recordings. And we have some great ones coming up, and I'll get to those after our session today. But we're glad you've taken some time out of the day to join us. A quick couple housekeeping notes for us today. All attendees, as you may have realized, have been automatically muted to minimize background noise and ensure everyone can hear the presentation. If you do have any questions, because we are going to leave some time at the end, at any point during the webinar, please use the Q&A function. The chat function has been disabled, and we'll do our best during the presentation to make sure we're getting those in queue for Nathan so we can address those accordingly. Today's webinar, if you did hear earlier, is being recorded and will be sent in a follow-up email along with recording and additional resources after today's presentation. So with that, let's get started. As I mentioned, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome a friend and colleague, Nathan Chappell, to Stelter today. Nathan actually spoke to our staff earlier this year when we had our annual meeting in January. We wanted it to be in person, but it was via Zoom due to some untimely weather. But Nathan, to many of you, is probably a household name in our industry thanks to some of the groundbreaking career that he's built around specifically the intersection of technology and the nonprofit sector. He's led large-scale nonprofit organizations and multi-billion-dollar fundraising campaigns for institutions including the University of San Diego, City of Hope. He's authored award-winning books such as The Generosity Crisis and Nonprofit AI, and he's even co-invented patented AI technologies focused on gratitude, prediction, and machine learning. If you haven't already, be sure to check out his 2018 TEDx talk on AI and the future of generosity, which is one among really the first to bring the subject into the public view. I mean, 2018 seems like a generation ago, but so much has happened since then. And I genuinely cannot think of a better person to spend some time with today around AI in our sector. And Nathan, I appreciate you joining us and looking forward to the talk. It's all yours.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. Great to be here. I was completely remiss in not sharing the slides while you were talking. So, but you did a great job of sharing where everyone's at right now. And this is you. And just to follow up on your point about asking questions, when you if you have questions, I'm definitely going to leave some time for the end. I'm really curious about what your questions are because this is a very new presentation. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. If you ask really difficult questions, I will defer them to the other Nathan, and we'll just pretend that they were for him from the very beginning. So great to be here. Great to spend time with all of you today. And again, we'll just kind of lead in. This topic, actually, N1 Philanthropy, it requires a little bit of explaining. I've done some informal polling to recognize that the name of a new book that I have coming out October 8th is largely misunderstood or not known about. The term is not known by a vast majority of people. So I'll actually take a couple steps back before we go forward. The term N1 is actually an actual term of N of one, meaning that There's a sample of one. And for those of you that have a background in statistics or math would already know this, or if you have a background in medicine, and specifically precision medicine, you'd also know this, that the idea, and I'll talk a little bit more about the origin story here. The idea is that in the future, there are no such things as donors or prospects or segments or cohorts or personas necessarily, but that in fact, technology will allow us to look at every person as an N of one, an individual. So this is a major, major shift from how fundraising has been conducted in the past. This is also, while it points to the future of fundraising, it's grounded in technology that exists today. So the topic here, the end of the average donor, has a whole story that goes back to my fundraising roots, and I'll share in just a second. But I wanted to acknowledge that because I've, my informal polling, people are like, what are you even talking about? What is this N1? And this actually then refers to a new book that's coming out October 8th called the same title, N1 Philanthropy, Precision, Connection, and the Future of Generosity. It's written by me and Gabe Cooper, who's the founder of Virtuous. And together we've actually written 4 books already. And it's essentially, I tell people, it's like our 4 books actually had through 2 different lenses, basically had a baby, and they came together in this book called N1 Philanthropy. And I can say it, even though I'm entirely biased and recognize this, that one is that I don't think this book ever could have been written before 2026 because it's leveraging technology that didn't exist in 2025. But also, I don't think this book could have been written by anyone else other than Gabe and I, because he's approached his 2 previous books on responsive fundraising and his 20 years of working in the nonprofit sector have been really focused on this idea of responsive fundraising, leveraging systems and automation to essentially drive performance. My background is in the type of AI called machine learning and deep learning. It's about predictive AI. And then essentially addressing the same thing from the lens of innovation in the sector in the future. So I spent 20 years as an accidental fundraiser, but prior to that, I was a technologist. So after leaving City of Hope, I launched a few AI companies. And when Nathan just mentioned that TEDx, it's something that I've spent a lot of money in counseling to remove from my memory, because if anyone does public speaking, there are sometimes things really click and sometimes things don't. That definitively was the worst presentation I've ever done in my entire life. And even though the TEDx version that you see online is a little bit edited, I can tell you it was a moment that I almost passed out on the stage in front of 100 people. And so I can laugh about it now after lots of counseling. But whenever anyone says, oh, you should watch this TED Talk from 2018, I'm like, absolutely don't watch that TED Talk because it still gives me chills. So let's just jump in. Really great to be here again. We'll spend some time in answering your questions, and I'm just really curious on what's landing, what's not landing, as this is a really new presentation from what I normally talk about, which is curiosity, trust, responsible, and beneficial AI. Okay, so I want to take you back in time a little bit. This is around 2015. I was serving as Associate Vice Chancellor at UC San Diego. I think at the time I actually may have still been a Senior Director in Health Sciences right before I took the AVC role. But in either case, I was working deep in health sciences. Our campus at UCSD was fairly broad, fairly large. I had an office on Torrey Pines, right on this beautiful golf course. But just across the street, in the middle of campus, stood Moore's Cancer Center. And Moore's Cancer Center was really an incredible place for a lot of innovation and clinical trials and just an incredible faculty. I got to know a faculty member named Dr. Barbara Parker really well. And she, to be honest, is so busy, but also so patient. And for someone like me that I tend to be a very curious person, I tend to ask a lot of questions. She spent I think back on this now, she spent a lot of time with me, very patiently telling me things that she didn't need to do. And I got really curious, of course, having a background in technology, with people like Barbara asking her, like, how is technology and how is understanding the human genome and mapping the genome going to change how medicine, kind of manifests itself in the future? And Barbara was so polite and kind to spend the time and really educate me on what is now we all know as precision medicine. It was this idea that forever, medicine, practicing medicine really concluded that there were classifications of different types of people and different types of diseases. In fact, if someone had a specific type of cancer, like say breast cancer or prostate cancer, they were categorized based on that type of cancer first, and then a treatment was prescribed. And what AI did, and we didn't really call it AI, but it was really AI, predictive AI at the time, after the genome was sequenced, recognized very quickly that there are really no categories of diseases. There are no classifications of people with these types of diseases because every single person is unique based on their own genotype. And their DNA really basically would allow us to understand whether a a cure that was previously just provided to everybody kind of in the same. If you have this type of disease, we just give everyone the same treatment. Well, the genotype, mapping the genotype taught us that for the first time, we understood why with some people with that treatment, it would actually help them and cure their disease. With another class of people, it would make no difference at all and that things would just continue to move on. And that there's actually a third class of individuals where the treatment that was provided would actually make their condition worse. And so, of course, in medicine, this became something that became very important and very timely in the sense of precision medicine really started for us to be able to look at every single person as an N of one. After UCSD, I went to City of Hope. City of Hope does around 300 clinical trials a year. And we heard the term N of one all the time because it was every single clinical trial was essentially built as this idea that every patient is an N of one. You are a sample of one is essentially what that is. So, no longer treating patients as averages, but then treating patients as an N of one. I think that's one of the easiest ways to understand the concept as I kind of go through this. But for anyone else that either has had a child or has been around a child, instinctually, or was a child, I guess makes the same amount of sense, knows that there's no other person like you. Like you are an N of one. You are not identified as a donor or a prospect or a lapsed donor or a sustained donor or a planned giving donor. You are an individual that has a varying degree of relationship with lots of different organizations. And that relationship changes over time as the data changes as well. So this is a moment that we've been talking about for a really, really long time. Again, I started fundraising in the year 2000. My CRM was actually called a Rolodex. And I remember the day where I got an upgrade to my CRM because I had to go to Staples and buy a second Rolodex because the first one got full. From there, we went from paper and cards to systems where we started classifying people either as givers or non-givers or lapsed donors and things like that. And for the first time, and for many years, we actually talked about segmentation, and micro-segmentation was a dream that one day we might be able to do. And for the large part, we talk about segmentation and segments now very, very broadly. I was on the phone with a higher ed institution recently, in fact, this week, who said, yes, of course we segment, but our segments are 250,000 people. And it's the paradox and the irony of that is pretty pervasive when we start to think about in the private sector how organizations, whether it be Starbucks or Netflix or Amazon or Carvana, that looks at their consumers' data and then treats that consumer as an N of one. So we see examples of this everywhere we go in the private sector, yet in the nonprofit sector, we're fairly far behind on this. So I want to kind of illustrate this a little bit more, the juxtaposition of how this kind of came to me in around 2015, 2016. I was in Dr. Parker's office. So go back there. I was in Dr. Parker's office, and she's telling me about this idea of N of one and precision medicine. And literally the same day or the same week, I can't remember what it was, but it was a while ago. I remember going back to my office, and I remember having a 5-hour meeting with an employee of mine about how we were going to raise money for the next campaign. And we used a term, which I'll share in a minute, that I'm not proud of. And it really leads to this, the juxtaposition of, N of one medicine, precision medicine to this. I'm really curious if we were in person, I would have you shout out what is the most patented device in American history. And I don't know. I don't know if we can see chat as well. You can. I think maybe chat is disabled. I can't remember. So we can't have the fun of this, but a lot of people will say like yesterday I did this. Someone said, "Oh, the Post-it note or the typewriter." Or what else have I heard? Some other, really, good things that, you would think of have been the most patented device in American history. And in this case, there's over 4,400 patents, of which only, I think, 13 have actually ever made a profit. And the number one best-selling patent on this device was actually filed in the late 1800s. And if that hasn't cued you into what the most patented device in American history is, it is, wait for it, drum roll, this. Not surprising. So why does this matter, and why am I even bringing up this idea of the most, patented device in American history as a mousetrap? Is because the same day or the same week I left Dr. Barbara Parker's office, I ensued in that 5-hour conversation with my head of prospect research using the term, we just need to build a better mousetrap. We had $1 billion to raise. We had too many donors. We knew that, what got us here won't get us there. And we unashamedly talked about building a better mousetrap, which then took me a few years to recognize that at some point in my career, I went from fully relational Rolodex type fundraising to essentially equating donors as mice. And I think it was that epiphany and that, and again, I share this humbly without, actually, definitely not any pride. I share this like being ashamed that I had actually ensued in these conversations. But it was that juxtaposition that actually didn't settle well with me a couple of years after this happened. And it was that epiphany that led me to writing that first book called The Generosity Crisis. And what happens if we don't change, and how we move from relational fundraising to transactional fundraising. But at the same time, we didn't have, this is in no fault of our own, we didn't have technology that was highly adaptive. We didn't have technology that really could scale to this N of one idea until 2026. And so that's where this is where we're in a whole new world. So this is my unfamous quote there. And admittedly, I spent 15 years building a better mousetrap, whether I called it that or not during the time, to optimize charitable participation. And what ensued from that is that we basically optimized the wrong target. So most of that is wealth. And we actually got we invested a lot of money to use wealth data to essentially identify who we should target and who we should not. And we used other scores like the recency frequency monetary score, the RFM score. And that's essentially how fundraising had happened for a long time. Now, just for an interesting point of fact, if you don't all know, that RFM score, which is still what a majority of nonprofits use instead of using predictive AI, machine learning, deep learning, they're using an RFM score, recency frequency monetary, that score was developed in the 1930s by catalog providers to essentially help identify which customers were worthy of receiving a printed catalog. These catalogs were obviously expensive. If I'll totally date myself, but there used to be a thing called a catalog, and you get it in the mail, and it would be this like large, kind of thick thing, and it would have every kind of product possible. I was young, remember seeing these, and it was kind of magical. And you could go through and buy anything you'd want through this catalog by calling a phone number or going to a store. Now, because those catalogs were expensive, the catalog providers or the retailers had to figure out a way, well, who are we going to send one to? And what they did is they actually took note cards and they laid them all out, and they sorted these note cards by people that had bought recently. So the people that had been, say, bought in the last year, then they actually equated that to the people who bought more frequently. And then they used actually the metric of money to know how much money they spent. And so based on that combination of recency, frequency, and monetary, that was essentially how that business had actually been built. And this is another thing in around 2018 when I started using machine learning and deep learning. We realized that three variables, largely absent of any understanding of who a human was and their behaviors and their likes and their dislikes, other than taking an action, was wholly incomplete. That essentially categorizing, all of your direct mail or all of your, your major gift portfolios, your plain giving portfolios based on three variables seems absolutely ridiculous. Yet that is still today in 2026 how a majority of nonprofits, the score that they use to essentially separate those that they'll spend time with versus those that they don't. And it's been our progress and our position since around 2018, where we started predicting gratitude using machine learning to recognize that people are far more complicated than three data points, unsurprisingly, that even with 1,000 data points, we can get a more holistic view of a person, but to recognize that based on what you do or don't do on any given day, that your relationship, your sense of belonging with an organization actually increases or decreases every single day. That manifests itself by through the data by things that you either click on or like or share or donate to or advocate for or volunteer with. And so this is the new world we're in. So this is the old way, and N1 is definitely declaratively kind of the new way. Of course, during my time fundraising for 20 years, my job never got easier. This is a different revelation I had at some point during my career. I was managing probably at that time 175 people. And I had to step back for a second to think, man, I've done this job for 15 years now. I'm a hard worker. I work, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week sometimes. And why is it that my job never got easier? And maybe I thought it was myself for a while. So I would start to ask other people, has your job ever gotten easier as you've gotten better at it? And of course, I've never met any fundraiser or any fundraising leader whose job has got easier over a period of time. Their jobs have gotten harder. Why is that? It's because when I started fundraising in the year 2000, 66% of Americans gave to charity. So that meant that I could walk into any Starbucks or, any, grocery store or whatever and ask someone, who is your favorite charity and why? And that meant 2 out of 3 people could tell me. I could essentially engage in a conversation that was on a fairly level playing field of, would you like to hear about our organization and what we're doing in the community? But over time, of course, and I don't have to go into this too deeply because you probably all are familiar with the data. But of course, now in 2026 or 2025, data is out. I think the total number of charitable participation, meaning the total number of donors that give to a 501c3 nonprofit, is less than 50%. It's around 45, I think 45.6%, like right around there within a 1 percentage point. That your job has not gotten easier. It's actually gotten much harder because there's been basically a falling out of the average donor. So what does that mean for most organizations? Is that they're competing for more money from less people. Of course, total giving continues to go up, but less people give. That means that that competition by nature, just purely from an economic perspective or competitive perspective, is increasing, not decreasing. Only to share that if this was the end of the story, I would probably never be invited back to speak anywhere. If this was the end of the story and I just said, you know what, we tried, we did our best, we'll do better next time, it would be really depressing. And I, for one, probably you as well, probably would have a hard time getting out of bed every day. But fortunately, that's not the end of the story. Fortunately, there's a reason to be super optimistic. There's a reason to think that not by our own design, but just based on sheer luck, that we live in a time where we have a technology that knows something about everything, can seemingly do anything, that is entirely democratized and free or nearly free, that can allow us to do things that were never before imaginable, to treat people not as large classifications as dear alum or dear donor or dear patient or whatever it might be, and actually use data to approach someone at the right time in the right way in the right cadence, for all the right reasons. Now, historically, and I made fun of a lot because I talk about Aristotle probably more than the average person, but Aristotle talked about fundraising 2,300 years ago, and he said, paraphrasing, I don't think it's in this deck, unless I'm repeating myself, is that, the idea of giving away money is easy, but to decide when and how and for what purpose and how to give it is actually very difficult. We live in an era now where we can actually solve for the first time in human history for those what I call the Aristotle barriers or those challenges. So where does this leave us today? We now live in this world of exponential technology. We have to make sure that we don't lose our soul. We have to make sure that we use our values to decide what we say yes to and what we say no to, something I speak about literally 5 times a week. But I truly believe that one of the greatest threats that we face right now is not the technology itself. It's that our limited thinking of that the future looks anything like today, that we continue doing things the same way and expect a different result. Our organizations are going to face a new form of the need to be relevant or seem irrelevant or outdated compared to the private sector that is getting to know their customers as an N of one in pretty much every kind of stage in life. And so acknowledging that what got you here won't get you there, acknowledging that the rules that constrained your ability to fundraise in the past are not the same rules going forward. And I speak a lot on curiosity, and I find out that we are so conditioned to think technology can only run incrementally that we become far less curious as a society and as professionals. And so I want to leave you kind of hopefully with a charge to rethink what's possible. In fact, the organizations that are highly successful in AI today are not trying to incrementally improve what they do. They're going back to the drawing board and they're asking questions like, what if our organization was one day old? Would it look the same? And then they are reimagining what's possible based on the technology that they have today. And of course, the need for innovation has never been greater. So while I think AI is impressive and has this inherent ability to help us address donors as an N of one and help us reimagine what's possible for our organizations, I can absolutely guarantee you that if we don't innovate now, that the headwinds that our sector is facing will not become less. They will only become more pervasive. If we continue to do things the same way, the data is very clear that giving in America and most developed nations will end at some point and not the far too distant future. When I wrote my first book, the number was 49 years on the current decline of charitable participation based on the number of people that gave to charity. With the new updated data from Lilly School and Giving USA, that number is closer to about 26 years if nothing changes. And so I share this with you as both fun, exciting, scary, but also as a moral imperative. And I look at it that anyone works in the nonprofit sector or with the nonprofit sector has a moral imperative if they believe in the power of generosity to solve society's greatest challenges, to promote a healthy well-being for people in communities, and to provide access and things for people who need it, then it becomes a moral imperative for us to actually lean in at this moment and do everything we can do to reimagine that generosity. Oh, and this is, I'm sorry, there is my famous, not my famous, but Aristotle's famous quote from 2,300 years ago. I'm just going to go pass by that. I'm just a nerd and I can't not talk about Aristotle every time I talk about philanthropy. In one way, it comforts me to know that the challenges that we're facing are not new. It should comfort you a little bit. So that idea, from the Aristotle barriers of like, it's hard, the idea of giving away money is easy, but to decide whom and how much and when, for what purpose and how to give it's really hard. That was totally impossible. It was totally, in fact, when I started working in AI in 2018, I didn't really care about any of those things. I only cared about who. Like it didn't matter how much I asked for, when I asked, for what purpose, and how I asked it, if it wasn't the right person to begin with. AI at the time was very limited to only one of those domains. And that domain was whom to ask. And so we got really good at understanding through machine learning and deep learning that idea of whom. And now most organizations have moved far past the RFM score, although some still use it. And I just encourage you not to. But whom to ask is something that AI for now many years has been able to help us with. But now moving into new forms of AI, we can start to address these other Aristotle barriers And this is where things can get really, really exciting for our sector. So if we can now ask ourselves these questions and then demand really practical answers, like what if every person was treated as a unique individual rather than the average? So again, kind of removing the word donor and non-donor, or donor and prospect, or lapsed donor, or monthly donor from our vocabulary per se, and we still have to be able to categorize people in certain ways, but to really think about the individual data that lives behind every single person, and to know that in those kind of classifications that every person can experience an organization in a unique way. Now, I will admit that up until now, none of this is anyone's fault. Literally, technology was not democratized. It was very inaccessible. It was expensive. And we had lots of administrative demands on our organizations. Our organizations have been built very bureaucratically. And so when I talk to these large organizations and I ask, what would your organization look like if it was one day old? Now in 2026, knowing that you have AI to help you do all those things, you probably wouldn't have been built an organization that spends 80% of its effort on admin and data entry. So administrative and organizational kind of workflows, with only leaving about 20% of that to build human connection. That was never anyone's intention, but that's how these organizations have grown, and data silos have grown, and organizational silos have grown. And so we look at this from the N1 way, being a complete reversal, is that instead of looking at people that you hire to do jobs, you instead look at an inventory. What are all the jobs that need to be done in our organization? I challenged a higher ed institution to do this recently. They came back and said they identified 441 or 443 jobs that they identified through all their individuals and their leaders that are done on any given day or any given week. And then they took those 441 jobs and they asked AI, which of these jobs could be highly augmented by AI? So that lets us reverse the org chart. We could go away from, we hire people to do jobs, but we look at what jobs need to be done, what AI can help do those jobs, and then, and lastly, what humans do we hire to manage the AI to do the jobs? Moving us from the status quo right now of we spend 80% of our time on organizational workflows and activities and only 20% on connection, to spending just 15% on administration and data entry and that organizational workflows, and 85% of your time on connection. Imagine the transformation that would be for any organization. Even a 20% basically optimization or efficiency gain that you could gain from AI is an extra day a week for every employee in your organization. So a 20% efficiency gain just by itself is an extra day a week for every single person. Now, of course, the question will be, what do you do with that 20%? Do you just do more emails and text messages and, quote unquote, routine fundraising? Or do you apply that dividend of time and that extra day a week to do things that only humans can do? And our argument in the book and in life, I don't think anyone would disagree with, is that your organization will be far more successful if you can offload the mundane and routine things that your organization does so that you could do more of the inherently human things for your organization. So we have to now, and I love philosophical questions, we have to face whether this idea is philosophical, like not very possible, is it plausible, or is it inevitable? And this is something that I asked lots of friends, and every time I go, to another conference, I kind of pull people aside, and I love philosophical questions that require practical answers. And in my opinion, this is not only philosophical, but absolutely plausible. The technology already exists to do this, but entirely inevitable. And we know this because actually following, I have found in technology, being successful in the nonprofit sector from a technological perspective is somewhat easy, because all you have to do is watch the private sector and wait 5 years or 10 years. Now, that timeline will be less and less forgiving as AI moves faster and faster in its exponential way. But the inevitability of this is paramount, because this is not a new kind of idea even for how the for-profit sector has been operating for quite a while. But with AI and the democratization of AI, this will be an inevitability, and this will be an expectation for every consumer, which is also the same as every expectation for every donor, is that you have data about me. It's imperative that that data is used well to help understand me and help form a sense of belonging, not to manipulate, of course, not to coerce, not to disrespect, but to better understand what are the things that you're really looking for in our organization, and how can that actually draw us closer together so that we can achieve more together than we could have alone. So just to recap all of that, that N of one is also translated as this idea of the clinical trial or statistical value as a, the number of one or a sample of one, to every person as a population one, and this book, Precision Connection, The Future of Generosity. All right, so I'll give you a couple kind of practical ways that we're thinking about this and how the book kind of distills this down. Now, there are kind of four main principles that Gabe Cooper and I have built out in the book to show that this isn't just philosophical, that it has some framework around it. Number one is that with the advent of predictive AI, which has been around for many years, I mean, it started in 1955, but really in the last 20 something years, predictive AI, so that's machine learning and deep learning, matched with generative AI, which all of you know, ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or Claude, that was released in November of 2022 by ChatGPT. So predictive AI with generative AI, and now a third wave of AI called agentic AI. Agentic AI, for those that don't know, stands for AI agents. And essentially, it's the ability for an AI to take both of those other things and to take action on them. So predictive and generative AI, and to take action. What this does is definitively allows us to look at scale without proportional organizational overhead. So this idea before of like, if you were going to say at a higher ed institution or a healthcare organization, it's like, we have 1 million prospects or 1 million donors, we're going to treat everyone individually, would be absolutely ridiculous, and either you get fired or laughed out of a room in about 12 seconds. But the idea of N of one, and I'll give an example, Carvana is a, I don't know, car vending machine company. My son bought a Kia from Carvana, and he didn't get to know anyone. He didn't have to talk to a salesperson. He ordered it through an app and went to a vending machine, had a big coin. They actually gave him a big coin. He put it in the thing, the car comes down. Very little personal relationship. But about a year later, about last year, a year and a half ago, he got an email with a video from Carvana, using only his zip code to understand his kind of weather and topography, the color of his car, the style of the car, his first name. So 4 data points, I guess. They produced a custom video for 1.2 million of their Carvana car purchasers. And the video was coming to him from his car. It was essentially his car on a road that was going down. It looked like a painting, like a oil painting of the car going down the road, passing a bunch of palm trees because we lived in California, and some mountains and some ocean. And then the car starts talking to him. And it starts saying things like, do you remember the day that you picked me up? I was so excited about all the adventures that we've gone on. And it's been a year, and it's just been this amazing thing for us to go and see all the things. And it was this very N of one personal experience that was not future. This happened now a year and a half, 2 years ago. But they were absolutely, they were able to produce all of those videos at one time. It wasn't like, okay, give us 2 years and we're going to produce 1.2 million videos. They output all of the videos at one time and sent them to the customers. It's a very famous case study right now. Now, the less sexy version of that is that, of course, most of you are on Amazon. And because Amazon knows you and your buying patterns so well, it predicts what you actually will most likely buy today, what you will buy in the future, and other things that you may be interested in. Just for fun, I actually turned off all of the prediction machine on Amazon at one point and basically looked at it. I'm a brand new person that it knows nothing about me. And the first thing that it recommended that I buy was fingernail clippers, because apparently that's the only universal truism that all people in the world need fingernail clippers. So with that said, AI now, because of that and the expectation from consumers, is to scale without a proportional organizational overhead, is letting you take even 4 data points and start to address people in unique and creative ways where they feel heard and seen and appreciated at a degree that would feel meaningful to them. The same is true of this hyper personalization. So the ability, the juxtaposition of saying dear alum or dear donor. Of course, none of your organizations are doing that now. I really hope, but the idea of like not just saying hi dear, Sally and John, but actually addressing, how many months it's been since their last gift, and how something that they had contributed to, saw a press release was announced the other day, and you thought that they would be interested in seeing this. So this idea that you can use hyper personalization at really no marginal cost at this point through lots of platforms. I mean, Virtuous has responsive fundraising built into the actual software. And we have a product called Momentum that actually takes an account for all these things and actually surfaces an email to a gift officer directly in their inbox without even having to draft it on their own, so they can edit it and then send it. And then this other piece of predictive anticipatory self-learning fundraising system. It's a mouthful, I know. It basically means that behind all of this, there's essentially a prediction engine. It's watching and listening. The Momentum product I just told you about is watching and listening for the number of days since, that spanned since the last gift was made, or other types of clues or cues that might actually be relevant for fundraising. And the self-learning part is that it recognizes that this is not a static algorithm that was the best the day it was released, is that the self-learning, and this is the beauty of AI, it's called a recursive self-learning application. So this is the first software or the first computer program that humans have ever created that has this recursive self-improvement application. So your predictive AI machine is not just static, it's always running behind the scenes. And then it also has to be grounded in this radical transparency and machine verifiable trust. This is highly contentious because this idea that you can have these machines providing recommendations, but at the same time, disclosure is absolutely imperative. And myself and Shiri and Koshi, we've actually done 2 years in a row. We're going to be releasing the third year where we've interviewed 1,000 donors each year on their perceptions of nonprofits using AI. Not surprising, donors are actually very supportive of nonprofits using AI because they see it as a term of or a way for efficiency. But they also believe that 90% of them believe that disclosure is absolutely important. And when asked in what way should nonprofits use AI, it was essentially the answer in both years, the last 2 years, has been to improve trust, to increase privacy and security. And so donors want to trust organizations more. And this is where things like cryptocurrency and NFTs are conditions in which money is not released until a condition has been met. Right now, trust manifests itself usually in a human form. It's like, well, I know the leader or I know the fundraiser, and I trust them enough that if I give them my check, they're going to put it where it needs to go. But what if there was a condition in the gift agreement that the money would not be released to your organization unless it was already in the appropriate bank account with the right condition? That is not new technology. That technology has been out for quite a while. And in the N1, we're essentially saying that we can help nonprofits increase trust tremendously by using the machines themselves to create a machine verifiable trust loop. So as I said, this was never before possible before 2026. In fact, the beginning of 2026 was really the form of agentic AI. So predictive AI to predict things, generative AI to generate things. Both of those things are great, well intended, and that's how most people are thinking about AI today. But unless you can take action on them at scale, they're really not going to help your organization very much. And so this N1 operating system, and I'll have to say that this is, again, probably a novelty in the nonprofit sector, but this is how in the private sector, most of the organizations that you buy from, that you interact with, are essentially doing things like this all the time. They're listening to your data. They're listening to, are you visiting a website? Are you clicking on it? Are you sharing it? Are you liking it? They're making predictions based on that. Now, social media is a really bad example of this because this is done at scale and it is done in a way that is not respectful of privacy. So I'm not suggesting social media is the answer for any of this. In fact, I think quite the opposite. But then this is where we get into, AI being able to create Carvana as an example, being able to use just a few data points to essentially identify an experience with something that would be enjoyable, something that would be creative. It could be a draft of an individualized outreach, never intending the draft to be sent by a bot. I should say this very clearly, is that we don't just believe in human in the loop because a computer can never be held accountable, that a human needs to be held accountable. So therefore, you should never outsource your trust to a machine. And therefore, you should have a human at the helm in everything that you do. So create a partner, creating efficiency and constantly looking at ways to help your organization become more efficient with your hygiene and your data and all of your data collection process as an orchestrator that chooses the right channel, timing, and sequence. And then the last part, which creates this virtuous loop, no pun intended, is this learning machine. And this is really the promise of AI, which is this recursive self-learning application that this goes and starts over. Similarly, the donor life cycle starts over. A person is, never ready and never done being your donor if you do this well, that the donor life cycle continues to go round and round and round. In the same way, your AI N1 operating system would go around as well. So this is the question I asked earlier. Everything I just shared with you, and of course, we only have an abbreviated amount of time today to really get into the promise of what AI is. And I would argue that most people right now in middle of 2026 have a very limited view of what AI actually represents, not about writing more emails faster or just offloading some analysis or synthesis. It's about doing far more than that. And if our sector wants to not just catch up, but wants to use this technology in a way that is respectful and responsible, and that means using it to represent a person's data in a way that would be advantageous to them getting to know you better. That becomes the ethical aspect of this. And so if we ask ourselves questions like, what if your organization was one day old? Or what if the marginal cost of personalization hit zero? Or what if fundraising shifted from reacting to donor behavior to actually anticipating it? I would say most organizations that I work with or talked to recently have said, we're really good reactively. Someone makes a gift and we jump in and we build a donor relations plan. But what if a stewardship plan was built in advance before a gift? Based on how this person kind of operates and the data that about them. So moving from a reactive to a proactive system absolutely is something that was for many years I would talk about with my teams and organizations that I led. But the technology didn't exist to be able to do that. You absolutely now, and this is how every private sector company now is anticipating, am I more likely to do something or not do something based on what data exists, whether it was the number of days since I bought my last cell phone or the way I've engaged or questions that I've asked about it, anything like that. Or what if every donor experienced a completely customized part of your nonprofit? So no more, dear donor, here's our annual report. That is the most broad thing that you could do. But if a person donated to a specific area, that their annual report would look unique to them. It would still have the basis of all the knowledge of what your organization does, but it would highlight the areas that are the most important to them. This is probably one of the easiest, biggest ways that I see N1 philanthropy absolutely working today in really helping steward a person based on what their passions and aspirations are with your organization. And what if donors could audit impact in real time? So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for Q&A. I will provide you, and this is the last one. Sorry, I cut myself short 1 second. Just to be aware, everyone in the for-profit world is chasing basically an idea that a for-profit company, an entrepreneur, can create a company that's worth $1 billion with one employee. And that might sound crazy, except there's already 5 of these organizations that exist as of now. Maybe this week there might be more, like 6 or 7. But the technology exists to generate $1 billion in revenue with one employee. We have to then reconcile and ask ourselves the question, what would it take for a nonprofit to do the same, to raise $1 billion, say, with one employee? Not to say that I'm advocating or not advocating for this, but to reconcile with the technology that exists to do that should make us think differently about what we've done in the incremental ways that we've actually raised money. With all that to say, I don't know. I think Nathan was going to help with some questions. And if we have any questions, feel free to put them in there. I know a lot of what I shared is probably uncomfortable. And I kind of learned to embrace that over time. And if you don't have any questions, I'm sure Nathan does. So we'll kind of get into that in just a second.
Yes, thanks, Nathan. I mean, I know I've heard you speak. I don't remember how many times I've heard you speak, but I always have this feeling of this combination of excited and freaked out. And it's just, again, there's so much opportunity, and I wholeheartedly believe, even outside of AI, but there's always opportunities for us to learn in the nonprofit sector from what people are applying in the for-profit.
Yeah.
And this is definitely an example. We have one long question. It's really more of a commentary in there, but I think you touched a little bit on it because obviously, we do want AI to impact a lot of different parts of our lives and opportunities for medical systems and other life-saving sectors and all that. But you mentioned,
Yeah.
Why now for AI with philanthropy? And I think you made that comment around, catching up. I mean, it's no surprise nonprofits typically are laggards. Change does move at a different snail's pace. So, I mean, when you think of why now in the nonprofit sector, and probably a good chunk of the folks on this call,
Yeah.
what should be the simplest thing that they're thinking of? How do they even get there? It seems so hard for a lot of organizations that aren't necessarily
Right.
known for change, aggressive change management. What
Yeah.
are some things that they should be thinking of or doing? What are some ways that they can, enact
Well,
change?
yeah. Okay. Well, I'll give one quick and a shameless plug here. I started a group in 2019. It really took off in 2022 called Fundraising AI. It's totally free. Nobody gets paid. It's now the largest virtual gathering. We have over 10,000. Last year we had 12,000 people from 110 countries. So really one of the best places is sign up for this free conference. We'll have 30 something speakers, one track for leaders who are making decisions on like how to lead in the AI era, and the other for people who just want to get hands on. Like, I'm not sure if I'm ahead. I'm not sure if I'm behind. I'm not sure where to do. These are some of the best speakers that we know globally that will be presenting for those 2 days. So definitely sign up. If you can't get the QR code, just remember fundraising.ai. Click on the summit tab and register for the free summit. You should do that. The other thing you should do is download this. And so, I work at Virtuous. We produced a report with Fundraising AI this year that showed that 92% of nonprofits were using AI, but only 7% were seeing major impact from it. So we got really curious about the 7%. We wanted to know why the gap was so wide and what the organizations that were thriving, what they were doing. It turns out there's only 6 principles that those 7% that all have in common. So it goes into AI governance and acceptable use and documenting what works and setting goals. It's like none of it costs a lot money. It takes time and discipline. So everyone should download this resource, or you can send it to people after. It is like really spelled out the 6 principles around it, what they mean, and then the last part I would say is you can follow me on LinkedIn if you want to learn more. I write on Substack and all that. But to be honest, the best way that you're going to learn to really understand what's possible and to push the boundaries is to spend 30 minutes a day not using AI for work, but using AI in ways that help you understand what the tool is good at and what the tool is not good at. And the analogy I like to use is that, I assume everyone has a toolbox in their house, some extent, and you have to hang a picture on the wall. You intuitively know to grab a hammer and not a saw. Or if you cut a piece of wood, you're going to grab a saw and not a hammer. The only way you know that is because you've either used that tool before or you've seen someone use it and you've learned what it's good for and what it's not good for. AI is no different. It is a tool. And so when people start to imagine like what's possible and how far can I push it? Well, how far can I push a hammer? Like how far, how efficient can I make a saw based on, how I cut left-handed or right-handed or whatever I do. and how it operates with different kinds of wood. The only way you know that is by experimenting. So I really, the easiest answer with this is to, and I have a 30-day plan that goes from like rookie to hero. It's literally spending 30 minutes a day in non-sexy things, just trying new things. So I'm happy to send that to anyone. But also you can go to Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot and say, hey, can you give me a 30-day plan on how I can use you better, and tell it a little bit about your role. And so I think those are good resources for you. But I hear that a lot. So I just wanted to address that.
No, I love that. I appreciate that too, because that was Kate's question is just how do you educate yourself on how to use this technology effectively? I always push everybody in fundraising AI, but I know from experience in our shop, use it in your personal life, just kind of play around. And so
Yeah.
it's brilliant, again, using AI to build an AI in 30 days plan for you. What a
Well,
crazy.
then it's specific for you. So give it some context. And so for those that don't know, there's a 97% correlation between how you prompt and the output you receive. And so if you prompt like a PhD, you're going to get PhD results. If you prompt like a fifth grader, you'll get fifth grader results. So in that case, give it context about you, your role, what you like, what you don't like. Never let AI do things that bring you joy. Like that's just a hard, fast rule. It shouldn't need to be said, but it is. Like, don't let AI do things that bring you joy. So tell it the things that I really enjoy to do are this, the things I don't enjoy are to do this. Give me a 30-day plan that can allow me to leverage you with this unique kind of learning pattern, and give enough context, you'll actually get a really good a good answer and a good plan.
Good stuff. Yeah, we got a lot of questions pulling in here. I'll just start from the top. Alana talks about, again, gift agreements and even gift or estate admin. Obviously, a lot of organizations have a bevy of procedures. Do you foresee organizations being able to use AI effectively with some of those things?
Yeah, and I'm so excited that this is finally true. I think I talked about this for the first time in like probably 2019, because there was, crypto was coming out, and it had this idea of basically a trust mechanism built in that you could actually build a gift agreement. And I'll just use crypto as an example, but can build it not using cryptocurrency, but in the technology that affords, it actually has trust built into it. And so, it's funny because the argument will be like, well, I have friends Giving Tuesday, and they're like, well, everyone loves Asha, the CEO of Giving Tuesday. Of course, they're going to give because of her, because they trust her. I'm like, well, what if they didn't need to trust her? What if their gift agreement was a secure bond between the organization and their bank, but they could actually just appreciate Asha for her vision? So I truly believe that gift agreements should and will move into a more, for lack of a better technical term, like an NFT, a non-fungible token that will basically say the amount of money won't be released until a condition is met. And that will either be an outcome, or it will be that it was put into the right bank account. And therefore, the donor has this sense of relief of like, oh, okay, now we can start talk about bigger and better things. So gift administration will largely be administration and that side highly, highly supported. I don't think necessarily made like there's not, you don't just lay off the entire admin team because, AI can do things, but you actually offload those things that are really routine and mundane. So gift admin could be highly more relational than anything else.
Yeah. Well, and again, that point of trust I know you brought up, I mean, that is inevitable, being transparent. That's critical for all of us. I know somebody brought up here Stephen Myers, and we're running out of time here. So a lot of
Yeah,
folks probably
yeah,
going to have to send you notes directly here to address those. But I know Stephen brought up, Gibbsy and kind of the virtual agents and things like that.
right.
Being transparent with all that is critical. Yeah.
Yeah. So disclosure, 90% of donors, we're going to do the study a third time. 90% of donors say disclosure is key. I think it's worth noting that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I think in the private sector, if you have financial, market demands for that, then you should expect that that's what they'll do. In our sector, I would suggest that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. That AI will continue to do really impressive things, but it doesn't mean you have to do those things. I'm not a fan of a bot that portrays itself as a human in any regard, even with disclosure. So those are very philosophical things that now require practical answers. And that's going to be incumbent upon people to think about their values and what they will say yes to and what they will say no to. So it's probably a good place to leave.
Yeah.
Shore up your values to a point, not just that they're nice to have and you think about them once in a while, but that you use your values and your organizational values to make decisions based on what you do and what you don't do.
No, great place to leave it. And I know we didn't get to a lot of people's questions. As we send out the deck and Nathan's information will be in there, don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's always happy to chat about this and share the insights and share some guidance. I think the October 2nd, that seminar will be in that slide too, so we can direct people to that.
Yeah,
Correct? Make sure
yeah,
that's there.
yep,
And again, you're making sure we have all the study. I'd love to follow what you and Sharon have been doing with that study.
yeah,
And so that's going to be out soon as well. So thanks so much. Awesome stuff. Again, thanks for everybody joining us and going the distance. Always excited to bring this type of content, and we'll get that information and the slides out to you so you can absorb more and ask the questions that need to be asked, being curious, as you mentioned. We've got 4 more chances for our webinar for you to join us on different webinar topics this year. Be on a lookout for those invites in your inbox. Our next one is just around the corner in September. It'll actually be myself and the brilliant Bill Knox from TIA Caspic talking about a new CGA research project we've been doing, looking at a new audience potentially for CGAs to hopefully expand that opportunity for organizations around the country. So, again, we wish everybody all the best with their fundraising efforts. Nathan, thank you as always. I love hearing you freak us all out and get us excited. And I'm glad you're doing what you're doing to stay ahead of this as best we all can. So, thank you again. We'll let you go and get back to your day. And thanks, everybody. Be on the lookout for those invites as well as a follow up from this webinar today.
All right, thanks everyone. Look forward to staying in touch.
All the best.